Nobody knew that Ace Frehley had written a letter before he died. Not his close family, not the members of KISS, not even Axl Rose had the slightest idea, until a yellowed envelope appeared at his door 3 weeks after the funeral. What Axl found inside left him in absolute silence for hours. And when he finally decided to share those words with the world, millions of people felt something break inside them. This is the story of that letter, and of what it contained. Axl Rose always spoke of Ace Frehley with a respect he reserved for very few. In old interviews, when asked about his influences, he mentioned KISS with an almost religious devotion. He said that seeing Ace with his silver guitar and space makeup had taught him something fundamental, that you could be completely free on stage, that you could be whoever you wanted to be. That rock wasn't just music, it was transformation. They weren't close friends. They didn't call each other every week. They didn't share family dinners. But they understood each other without needing words. Two souls marked by the same brutal war, the one of success that devours, the loneliness that comes after crowds, and that permanent addiction to music that never leaves you in peace. Both had survived decades of excess. Both had seen too many friends fall. Both knew the real price of being a rock legend. When Ace died in October of 2025, Axl didn't post anything on social media. He didn't give statements to the press. He simply disappeared for days. His close friends said he locked himself in his Malibu house and didn't want to see anyone. Because there are losses that can't be processed in front of cameras. There's pain that needs silence. 3 weeks passed since the funeral, 3 weeks of public tributes, of hastily made documentaries, of homages on all music channels. The whole world was talking about Ace, but Axl remained silent. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, the doorbell of his house rang. His security team checked the cameras as always. It was an older man. He must have been about 70 years old. He wore worn jeans and a red flannel shirt. He wore a Yankees cap, and in his trembling hands was a yellowed envelope with a navy blue seal. He said his name was Robert, that he had worked as a technical assistant with KISS during the 70s and 80s. That Ace had given him that envelope 3 days before dying with very specific instructions. Wait a month, and then take it personally to Axl Rose, to no one else, only to him. Security normally wouldn't have let someone like that through. But something in that man's urgency, something in the way he held that envelope as if it were sacred, made them call Axl. Axl came down personally. He opened the door. And there was Robert, with moist eyes, extending the envelope with trembling hands. On the front, written in black marker with Ace's unmistakable handwriting, were only 2 words: for Axl. Axl took the envelope without saying anything. He looked at it for several seconds. He thanked Robert with a nod and closed the door softly. He went up the stairs to his main living room, the one where he has the black grand piano that dominates the space. He left the envelope on the keys and simply stood there, looking at it. He didn't open it that day, not the next day either. The letter remained there for almost a week, intact, waiting. Every time Axl entered that room, he saw it. Some days he would approach it, take it in his hands, feel the thickness of the paper, mentally calculate how many pages would be inside. But he always returned it to its place without opening it, because opening that letter meant something definitive. It meant hearing Ace's voice for the last time. And after that, there would be nothing left. Only the permanent void of knowing that there would never be new words again. Never more possible conversations. Never again. His friends noticed the change. Axl became even more distant. He canceled all his activities, rejected important calls. He only remained in that house facing the ocean, with a letter he didn't dare to read. The letter was more than paper and ink. It was a decision. It was accepting that Ace had really gone. It was closing a door that part of him wanted to keep open forever. But unread letters weigh heavy. They have their own gravity, their own presence. And with each passing day, the weight became more unbearable. It was a Friday night when he finally decided it was time. There was nothing special about that day. No sign from the universe. He simply felt he had waited enough, that it was time to face whatever those pages contained. He turned off all the lights in the house. He lit a single candle and placed it on the piano. The golden light flickered against the walls, creating dancing shadows. There was something ritualistic about that moment, something sacred. He sat in front of the piano. He took the envelope with both hands. His fingers trembled slightly. He could feel his heart beating strong in his chest. He breathed deeply. Once, twice, 3 times. And then, with a slow and deliberate movement, he broke the seal. Inside were 3 folded pages. Quality letter paper, black ink, Ace's handwriting, trembling from illness but firm in its intention. He unfolded the first page and began to read. The first word said, "Axl, if you're reading this, it's because my journey has come to its end." Axl felt something break inside his chest. He closed his eyes, he breathed, and continued. "But I want you to know something first. Don't feel sorry for me. I lived more lives in 74 years than most live in 200. I played on the biggest stages in the world. I met the most incredible people. I made the music I wanted to make. I don't regret anything." Axl moved to the second page. Tears were already running down his face, but he didn't stop. "I'm writing specifically to you because I believe that of all the musicians of your generation, you're the one who most understands what it means to carry a legend. What it means to be an icon when you still feel like that scared kid who just wanted to play music." Ace's words flowed as if he were speaking directly to him, as if he were sitting there in the room. "People believe that rock and roll dies when we die, but they're wrong. Rock never dies. It just changes bodies. It passes from one generation to another, from one guitar to another, from one heart to another. It is long." Axl had to stop. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The candle kept flickering. The ocean sounded in the distance. "And you, Axl, you're one of those new bodies that keeps the flame alive. That's why I'm writing to you, because I need to ask you something before I go." The third page contained the central message. The real reason why Ace had written that letter. "Keep playing, brother. Not for us who have already gone. Not for fame or money. Not for the fans who demand that you always be the same. Play for those who don't yet know they need music. For the kids who are lost like we were. For those who need to believe they can be something more than what the world expects of them." Axl read that line 3 times, 4 times, until the words were engraved in his memory. The music we made, you and I, in different bands in different eras, wasn't for fame. It was for faith. Faith that rock could change lives, that a song could save someone, that art matters more than business. The next lines were even more personal. "I know you've had your battles. I know the world has judged you 1,000 times. I know you've felt the weight of expectations until you wanted to give up. I felt it too. We all felt it. But here's the secret I learned after 50 years of career. You don't owe anything to anyone except to the music itself. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to meet expectations. You don't have to be the Axl everyone expects. You just have to be honest. Play what you feel. Create what you need to create. And let that be enough." Axl felt something changing inside him as he read those words. As if a weight he had carried for decades was beginning to lift. "When I'm gone, there will be tributes. They'll play my songs. They'll tell stories about the old days. And that's okay. But that's not what I want you to do. I want you to do something different. I want you to create something new. Something that didn't exist before. Something that only you can create. Because that's what the world really needs. Not more nostalgia, but new music, new fire, new life." The last lines of the letter contained the final message. Rock and roll is rebellious by nature. But true rebellion isn't making noise. It's staying true to yourself when everyone asks you to be something else. It's creating with honesty when the industry asks for formulas. It's moving forward when it would be easier to give up. So keep going, Axl. Play until you can't anymore. Create until it hurts. Live until the last chord fades away. And when your moment comes, let someone else grab that torch and carry it even further. Because rock doesn't die, it just changes hands. The letter ended with a simple but devastating farewell. Thank you for the music. Thank you for keeping the flame alive. Thank you for being real in a world of lies. See you on the other side, brother. And when you get there, we're going to play together the best show no one will ever see. And then the signature. Ace, your brother in eternal music. Axl finished reading and remained completely still. Tears fell on the pages, but he didn't care. He read the complete letter again, and then a third time. Each word resonated like an echo in his soul. He didn't know how long he sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe 3. Time lost meaning. There was only him, that letter, and the message it contained. Finally, when he could move again, he carefully folded the pages. He put them in the envelope and pressed it against his chest, as if it were the most valuable thing he had received in his life. He stayed there until dawn, without sleeping, without moving, processing, feeling, accepting. And when the sun began to rise over the ocean, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Axl did something he hadn't done in months. He sat in front of the piano. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. It wasn't a Guns N' Roses song. It wasn't a Kiss cover. It was something completely new. A melody that emerged directly from that moment, from that pain, from that gratitude, from that silent promise he had just made. He played for hours, without stopping, without thinking, just feeling. The notes flowed as if they had a life of their own, as if Ace himself were guiding his fingers. And at some point, without planning it, he began to sing. Words that emerged on their own, a song about loss and legacy, about passing the torch, about keeping the flame alive when those who lit it are no longer there. The following days were different. Axl didn't leave his studio. He didn't answer calls. He didn't check emails. He just created, composed, recorded ideas, explored new sounds he had never tried before. His producers said they had never seen him like that. So focused, so inspired, so free. He recorded a complete song in those days, one that captured everything he had felt reading that letter. He titled it simply, The Last Chord. Not for Ace, but for that moment where something ends and something new begins. Weeks later, in a surprise interview he gave to a small independent rock magazine, he mentioned the letter for the first time. Ace left me something before he went, he said in a calm voice. Words I needed to hear, and those words changed something fundamental in me. They asked him if he could share what the letter said. Axl thought for a long moment, and then he spoke. It said that rock doesn't die when we die, that it just changes bodies, and that our job is to keep the flame alive until the moment comes to pass it to the next generation. He asked me to keep creating, not for nostalgia, but for faith. Faith that music can still change lives, that it still matters, that it can still save someone. He paused for a long time. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. The interview went viral in hours. Millions of people saw it, thousands commented, and what impacted everyone most wasn't just the content of the letter, but the way it had transformed Axl. There was something different in his gaze, something calmer, more confident, as if he had finally found the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. Months later, during an intimate concert in a small theater in Los Angeles, Axl did something unprecedented. Before playing his last song of the night, he spoke to the audience. "I want to share something with you," he said while adjusting the microphone. "Something that someone very special left me before leaving." The theater fell into absolute silence. He told me that true rock and roll isn't about making noise. It's staying true to yourself when everyone asks you to be something else. It's creating with honesty when they ask for formulas. It's moving forward when it would be easier to give up. His voice broke slightly, and he asked me to keep playing, not for him, but for all those who don't yet know they need music. For those who are lost like we were. For those who need to believe they can be something more. Applause began to sound, but Axl raised his hand, asking for silence. "This song is new. I wrote it after reading his words, and it's my way of saying thank you and of promising you, brother, that I'm going to move forward. That I'm going to keep the flame alive until my moment comes to pass it on." And then he began to play The Last Chord. The song was different from everything he had done before. More intimate, more vulnerable, more real. It spoke of loss, but also of hope. Of endings, but also of new beginnings. Of death, but also of eternal legacy. When it ended, the silence in the theater was absolute for several seconds. And then, an ovation that lasted entire minutes. People crying, hugging each other, feeling they had witnessed something sacred. That night, several attendees posted videos of the moment on their social media. And although the audio quality was terrible, the emotional impact came through the screen. The video went viral. Millions of views in days. And so, without planning it, without marketing strategy, without advertising campaign, Ace's message reached the whole world. Not through corporate documentaries or official tributes, but through the music itself. Through the brutal honesty of an artist transformed by words written on paper. The letter was never officially published. Axl decided to keep most of its content private. Some messages are too personal to be shared completely, he said. But the essence, the spirit of what Ace wanted to say, that needs to live. And it lives in every note that Axl now plays with renewed passion. In every young musician who hears the last chord and decides not to give up. In every person who understands that legacy isn't about statues or commemorative plaques, but about passing the torch, about keeping the flame alive, about creating something that transcends your own existence. Ace Frehley died, it's true. His heart stopped beating. But his spirit, his message, his faith in the transformative power of music that will never die. Because it found its way to the right hands, to the right heart, to the musician who could carry that message further. And Axl Rose, the man who screamed louder than anyone in the world's stadiums, now understands something profound. That true rock isn't in the volume, it's in authenticity. In the courage to be vulnerable, in the decision to keep creating when it would be easier to live off the past. That 3-page letter with black ink became something bigger than paper and words. It became a beacon, a guide, a reminder of why we started all this, of why music matters, of why it's worth moving forward. And every time someone sees that concert video, every time they hear the last chord, every time they decide to keep chasing their dream despite difficulties, Ace is there. Not physically, but in spirit, in energy, in the unbreakable faith that rock and roll can change the world one person at a time. Because that letter wasn't just for Axl, it was for all of us. For anyone who ever felt that the path was too difficult, that expectations were too high, that it would be easier to give up. The message is simple but powerful. Keep going. Keep your flame alive. Create with honesty. And when your moment comes, pass that torch to the next generation. Because rock doesn't die, it just changes hands. And as long as there's someone willing to hold that torch, music will live forever. If this story moved you in some way, I invite you to share in the comments what phrase from that letter touched you most deeply. What inspires you to keep going when things get difficult? What legacy you want to leave when your moment comes? Because sometimes, what someone leaves written before leaving isn't a goodbye. It's a way of staying, a way of continuing to change lives long after their heart stops beating, a way of being eternal. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that go to the heart of rock, that show the humanity behind the legends, that remind us why music continues to be the most important thing we have. See you in the next story. And remember, rock doesn't die, it's just waiting for you to pick up the guitar. When everyone expected a speech, Axl Rose only asked for one thing: play this song. What sounded next made even those who never knew Ace Frehley cry. Because it wasn't just music. It was a goodbye in the only language they both really spoke. And what Axl did with that song changed the meaning of the funeral forever. The funeral took place in Manhattan, in a historic chapel on the Upper West Side. Small, intimate, no press. The family had been clear. This wasn't a show. It was a real farewell between real people. Musicians from all eras were there. Slash with his black top hat, Duff McKagan with red eyes, Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons in the first row, Tommy Thayer, Bruce Kulick. Decades of rock history concentrated in a space that could barely contain them. Everyone expected someone to speak, for someone to say something memorable, something that captured the magnitude of the loss, something the world could quote afterward. But Axl Rose remained motionless in his seat, staring at the coffin covered in white flowers. His jaw clenched. His hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles looked white. He had arrived alone that morning. No entourage, no security. Just him and a driver who had dropped him at the side door to avoid any straggling cameras. He wore a simple black suit, nothing ostentatious, nothing that drew attention. Just another man among many who had come to say goodbye to a friend. The pastor had spoken for 15 minutes. Beautiful but generic words. Because how do you capture the essence of someone like Ace Frehley in conventional words? Then one of Ace's sons spoke. His voice broke several times. He had to stop to breathe. To compose himself, he spoke of an imperfect but present father, of a man who loved music more than anything except his family. And then came the moment when traditionally close friends say a few words. The funeral coordinator looked at Axl. Everyone looked at Axl, expecting him to stand up, to walk to the microphone, to say something everyone could remember. But Axl didn't move. He just shook his head slightly. The coordinator approached and whispered something to him. Axl shook his head again, and then, finally, he spoke, loud enough for those around to hear. "I'm not going to give a speech." A murmur ran through the chapel. People looked at each other, confused, surprised, some even offended. How was it possible that Axl Rose, one of the biggest names in rock, would refuse to honor Ace with words? But Axl wasn't finished. He slowly stood up from his seat, and without looking at anyone, he walked to the front of the chapel, where there was an upright piano made of dark wood, an old but well-maintained piano that the chapel used for ceremonies. He sat in front of it, adjusted the bench, put his hands on the keys but didn't press them yet, just left them there. Feeling the cold ivory under his fingers, the silence stretched out, uncomfortable, heavy. People began to shift in their seats, and then Axl spoke, with a hoarse but clear voice that filled every corner of the chapel. Ace hated speeches. He hated empty words. He hated everything that sounded fake or rehearsed. He told me once, years ago, after a festival where we had to listen to a bunch of executives talk about the spirit of rock without understanding anything. He told me, "When I'm gone, don't let anyone come and tell pretty lies about me. Just play music and that's it." He paused for a long time. The silence in the chapel was absolute now. Everyone hanging on every word. "So I'm not going to make a speech. I'm going to do what he would have wanted. I'm going to speak to him in the only language we both really understood. The only one that never lies. The only one that matters." And he played the first chord. The sound immediately filled the chapel. Clear, clean, perfect. And some recognized it instantly. It wasn't an obvious song. It wasn't a Guns N' Roses hit or a Kiss classic. It was something different, something deeper. A ballad few expected, but everyone knew on some level of the soul. It was Beth, one of Kiss's most emotional songs, but not the original version. It wasn't Peter Criss singing about coming home. It was Axl Rose transforming it into something completely new, into a conversation with the beyond. Axl began playing the complete melody. His fingers moved over the keys with a confidence that surprised many. Not everyone knew that Axl was an accomplished pianist, that he had learned as a child, that the piano was his first love before the guitar. Before rock, before everything, the song progressed slowly, each note loaded with contained emotion. And when it came time to sing, Axl closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began with a voice no one had heard in him before. His voice was different from how it sounded in stadiums. Softer, more vulnerable, more human. There were no screams, no poses, just brutal honesty poured into every word. He sang each line as if it were a private conversation, as if only he and Ace were in that room, as if no one else existed. And then came the moment no one expected. The line everyone knew from the original song, but Axl changed it, modified the words, made them personal, made them his own. Where the original lyrics said, "Beth, I hear you calling," Axl sang, "Ace, I still hear you. In every chord I play, in every silence between the notes, in every moment when I pick up a guitar and think about giving up but don't because I know you never did." The entire room froze. The air itself seemed to stop, because in that moment everyone understood what was happening. Axl wasn't performing a song. He was speaking directly to Ace. He was having the conversation they never had in life. He was saying the things that were never said but were always there, waiting for the right moment. Slash closed his eyes tightly. Tears ran down his face without him being able to control them. His shoulders trembled. Duff McKagan had his face in his hands, unable to look directly at the piano because it hurt too much. Paul Stanley, the man who had shared stages with Ace during Kiss's most glorious years, cried openly without trying to hide it. Gene Simmons, always so controlled, so calculated, had tears running down his face. But it wasn't just the famous musicians. It was everyone. Every person in that chapel felt something break inside them. The sound technician who had worked with Ace in the 80s, the second cousin who had barely seen him in years, the lucky fans who had gotten permission from the family to be there. Everyone cried, everyone felt, because Axl had found the perfect way to express the inexpressible, to give voice to the collective pain they all shared, to turn loss into something beautiful instead of just sad. The song continued. Each verse was an emotional dagger plunged with surgical precision. Each chorus was an embrace from the other side of the veil. Axl played with an intensity that transcended musical technique. It didn't matter if some note was slightly off-key. It didn't matter if his voice occasionally broke. All of that only made the moment more real, more honest, more devastatingly beautiful. He continued modifying the lyrics. Where the original song talked about being busy and not being able to come home, Axl sang about being on different sides of existence, but still connected. About how death cannot break bonds forged in the fire of rock and roll. About how every time he played, he felt Ace's presence guiding his hands. I can't go where you are now, brother. It's not my turn yet. But every night I play, every chord I wrench from the strings, it's a way to get closer, to keep alive that connection that death thought it could cut but was wrong. Outside the chapel, fans who hadn't been able to get in, but had congregated on the street despite the October cold, began to hear the music. Someone had slightly opened one of the side windows so air could circulate, and the sound of the piano filtered outside like sacred smoke. One by one, the fans began to recognize the melody. Some had heard it at Kiss concerts, others knew it from the radio, and they started humming it, softly at first, then louder. Until there was a chorus of 50, 100, 200 people singing from the street, their voices mixed with Axl's, creating something that had never been planned but was perfectly appropriate. A group of motorcyclists passing through the area stopped when they heard the music. They got off their Harleys, removed their helmets, and joined the singing. Because that's what rock is. It knows no borders. It doesn't ask for credentials. If you feel the music in your soul, you're part of the family. Inside the chapel, Axl was completely absorbed in the music. Eyes closed so tightly the wrinkles around them were visible, hands moving over the keys with a life of their own. His voice breaking in the most emotional moments but never stopping. He wasn't acting, he wasn't performing, he was simply being. He was feeling. He was letting all the accumulated pain, all the unexpressed gratitude, all the complicated love between two rock warriors flow through the music. When he reached the bridge of the song, that moment of maximum emotional intensity that every good ballad has, Axl did something unexpected. He stopped following the original melody completely. He improvised. He created something new on the existing structure. He gave it his own completely personal twist, and he sang verses that didn't exist in any recorded version. Verses he was clearly inventing in the moment. Words that flowed directly from his heart without filter or editing. Ace, you taught me that rock isn't about being the loudest. It's about being the most real. About getting on a stage and leaving your soul there, even if no one values it. About playing like every show is the last, because maybe it is. You taught me that music isn't a job, it's a way of breathing. And now that you're not here, the air feels different, heavier, colder. But I keep breathing, I keep playing, because that's what you would do. He spoke of stars that keep shining millions of years after going out, of how their light keeps traveling through the universe, touching planets that will never know their origin. He spoke of guitarists who never stop playing because their music lives in the hearts of those who love them. He spoke of legacies that aren't measured in records sold or stadiums filled, but in lives changed by 3 minutes of musical honesty. I'm going to miss you backstage. In those moments before going out, when everyone's nervous, but no one admits it. I'm going to miss you in airports at 4 in the morning when no one else is awake except musicians. I'm going to miss you every time I see a space guitar, and remember that you were the first to make us believe we could be superheroes just by putting on makeup and attitude. They weren't the original lyrics of any song, they were Axl's words, his raw, unpolished poetry, his personal tribute, his way of saying that Ace would never really leave as long as there existed someone who remembered not just his music, but what he represented. Absolute freedom to be who you were without asking anyone's permission. Tears ran down Axl's face, but he didn't stop. He didn't wipe his eyes. He just kept playing, kept singing, kept pouring his soul onto those ivory keys, as if it were the last time he would play an instrument in his life. Ace's eldest son, sitting in the first row next to his siblings, had his face completely broken down by crying. But he was also smiling, a sad but genuine smile, because he knew his father would have loved this. He would have hated a formal speech full of cliches about resting in peace and being in a better place. But this was perfect. This was rock and roll in its purest form. Honest, vulnerable, real, without masks or makeup. His daughter, who had flown in from California that morning, was discreetly recording on her phone, not to post it, but to have that moment preserved. To be able to watch it when she needed to remember that her father had been loved, that he had mattered, that his life had touched other lives in deep and unexpected ways. Gene Simmons, the man who rarely showed public emotion, who had built an entire career on maintaining mystique and control, had tears running freely. His makeup, which he had partially applied as tribute, was running, creating black lines on his cheeks, and he didn't care. For the first time in decades, he didn't care how he looked, only how he felt mattered. Tommy Thayer thought about all the years he had played the spaceman role in Kiss, wearing the makeup Ace had made famous, playing the solos Ace had created, walking in shoes he could never completely fill. And in that moment, he understood something that had been eluding him for years. It wasn't about replacing Ace. It was about honoring him, keeping that energy alive, that spirit, that attitude, because that's what was happening in that chapel. Axl wasn't just saying goodbye to Ace. He was reminding every musician present why they did this, why they chose the rock life despite all the pain it entails, why music is worth every sacrifice, every battle against addiction, every relationship broken by always being on tour, every sleepless night, every lost decade along the way. Why all of that is worth it if you can create a moment like this. A moment of human connection so deep it transcends words. The song was approaching its end. Axl slowed the tempo even more than it already was. Each note lasted an eternity. Each word weighed like the entire universe. Time itself seemed to have stopped inside that chapel, as if the outside world had ceased to exist and only this remained. One man, one piano, and a message for someone who could no longer respond but who somehow was listening. And when the final line came, the one that traditionally closes the song with a note of melancholic hope, Axl did something more. He added a final verse, completely his own, a farewell that summarized everything he had tried to say. Keep playing, brother, wherever you are now, in heaven, in hell, in some alternate dimension where musicians go after this life. Keep playing, and I'm going to keep playing here, on this plane, in this world that feels a little emptier without you. And when that day comes, when I finally cross to the other side, you better have your guitar tuned, because we're going to play a show that will shake the stars. We're going to make a noise so loud that God himself will come to complain about the volume, and we're going to tell him to fuck off, because that's who we are. That's who we've always been, and that's who we'll be for all eternity. And then, with a final chord that resonated for seconds that felt like hours, he finished. He let the last note fade naturally, until it became silence, a sacred silence. A silence no one dared to break because doing so would be to profane something holy. Axl kept his hands on the keys for several seconds after the sound died out, as if he didn't want to let go of that moment, as if removing his hands would be cutting the last thread, connecting him to Ace on this physical plane. The silence that followed was absolute, total, mystical. No one moved, no one spoke, no one coughed or cleared their throat. No one applauded. Because applauding would have been an insult. It would have turned that transcendent moment into something common, into entertainment. And this hadn't been entertainment. It had been communion. It had been art in its highest form. It had been love expressed in the only language that never lies. Axl remained seated at the piano for almost 2 full minutes. With his hands still on the keys, though, he no longer pressed them. Eyes still closed, his chest rising and falling with deep, trembling breaths. Processing. Feeling. letting go of everything he had been holding in for weeks since receiving the news of Ace's death. Finally, very slowly, as if each movement required monumental, conscious effort, he opened his eyes. He stood up from the piano bench. His legs trembled slightly. He had to lean on the piano for a second to regain his balance. And then he walked toward the coffin. Each step seemed to cost him, as if he were walking against an invisible wind. He reached the coffin and placed his right hand on the polished, shiny wood. He let it rest there for several seconds. He could feel the cold of the wood against his palm. So final, so definitive. He leaned in slightly and whispered something only he and Ace would know. Private words, personal, between brothers in arms. Something about a promise, something about not forgetting, something about moving forward but never leaving behind. Then he straightened up, looked toward the first row where the family was. Ace's children, his ex-wife, his siblings. He nodded at them. A silent acknowledgement of shared pain, of collective loss, of the responsibility they all now carried to keep his legacy alive. And then he turned to face the rest of those present, toward all those musicians, technicians, fans, and friends who had come to say goodbye. He spoke, with a clear voice despite the tears that continued falling, with a strength that came from somewhere deep. Rock and roll doesn't die when our bodies die. That's what people who don't understand think. But we know the truth. Rock is immortal. It just changes form. It transforms. It passes from one musician to another, from one generation to the next. Like a torch that never goes out, just changes hands. He paused, looked at the coffin, then looked back at the audience. And Ace is going to keep living. He's going to keep living every time someone in some garage, in some forgotten suburb, picks up a guitar for the first time and feels they can be something bigger than what the world says they can be. He's going to keep living in every kid who puts on space makeup and stands in front of the mirror and decides they can be a superhero. He's going to keep living in all of us who keep playing despite the pain, despite the losses, despite everything this brutal business takes from us. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. He's going to keep living in every chord we play thinking of him, in every guitar solo we dedicate to his memory, in every moment when we're about to give up but decide to keep going because we know that's what he would have done. Ace never gave up. Never. He fell 1,000 times. He got up 1,001. And that's what he taught us. That rock isn't about never falling. It's about always getting up. The words now came like a torrent, as if everything he had held back during the funeral finally found its way out. So we're not going to say goodbye today, because goodbyes imply an ending. And this isn't an ending. It's a transformation. Ace moved to another form of existence, one we don't fully understand. But he's there, in the music, in the memories, in every moment when we feel that inexplicable connection that only music can create. He looked directly at the coffin one last time. See you on the other side, Ace. Save me a spot on the best stage in heaven or in hell, wherever musicians who live too fast and burn too bright end up. And when my turn comes, when it's finally my time to cross, we're going to play together. A show for the angels, or for the demons, or for whoever the hell is listening on the other side. And it's going to be epic, because that's what we do. That's what we are. We are rock and roll never dies. Never. And without saying anything more, without waiting for a response, without looking back, he turned on his heels and walked toward the side exit. The same one he had entered through 3 hours earlier, as a man carrying an unbearable weight. But now he walked differently. Lighter. As if he had left part of that weight at the piano. In the music, in the words he had finally found the courage to say. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And only then, only when he left, did the spell break. People began to react. It was as if his departure had given permission to the rest to feel, to process, to let go. Some applauded with tears running down their faces. Others simply cried without control, without trying to hide it, without shame. Many hugged each other. Strangers hugging strangers, united by shared pain and by having witnessed something extraordinary. Everyone knowing they would never forget that moment for the rest of their lives. Paul Stanley stood up and hugged Gene Simmons, two men who had fought publicly for years, who had said horrible things about each other. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that they had lost a brother, and that the pain of that loss was bigger than any difference. Slash walked to the piano. He touched the keys Axl had touched, as if by touching them he could absorb some of the magic of that moment, as if he could keep that energy alive. He closed his eyes and hummed the first notes of the song, and others joined him, one by one, until the entire chapel was singing softly, not the original words of Beth, but the verses Axl had improvised, the ones that spoke specifically about Ace, the ones that turned a love song into a hymn of eternal brotherhood. Outside, the fans who had heard everything from the street began to disperse slowly. But they weren't going home. They stayed in small groups on corners, sharing stories about what Ace meant to them, what song had saved them in what dark moment, how his music had changed their lives in ways they could never fully explain. A boy about 17 years old, wearing a worn Kiss t-shirt, cried uncontrollably, leaning against a wall. He had never met Ace personally, but his music had helped him survive bullying at school. It had helped him find the courage to be different, not to fit into the mold everyone expected. And now that hero was gone. But the music remained, the lessons remained, the legacy remained. Videos began circulating that same afternoon. Despite the family's request for privacy, some short clips appeared on social media. They didn't show much, just blurry fragments filmed with trembling phones. But they were enough for the world to understand what had happened. For millions of people who hadn't been there to be able to feel some of that magic, of that pain transformed into beauty. The comments numbered in the millions within hours. People from all countries, speaking all languages, sharing how that performance had touched them, how it had reminded them of their own losses, how music can say what words cannot, how art, in its purest form, transcends barriers of language, culture, geography. A musician in Tokyo wrote, "I never met Ace Frehley, but after seeing this, I feel like I knew him through Axl." That's the power of music, connecting souls that never physically touched. A woman in Buenos Aires commented, "My father died 3 months ago. I couldn't tell him everything I wanted to, but watching this, I understand that maybe music can be my way of still talking to him. Thank you, Axl, for showing me there are other ways to say goodbye." A teenager in London wrote, "I'm 16 and just discovering this music, but this made me understand that rock isn't just about loud guitars, it's about truth, and this was the purest truth I've ever seen." Days later, in a brief statement through his representative, Axl explained why he had chosen exactly that song and why he had transformed it that way. "Beth was always special, not specifically to me, but for what it represented. A love song in the midst of all the chaos of rock, a vulnerability in the midst of all the posing. And Ace understood that. He understood you could be tough and soft at the same time, that you could wear space makeup and still be completely human. I wanted to honor that duality, that complexity, that humanity." The statement continued, "And I needed to talk to him, not through a prepared speech, but through the only language we both really spoke. Music is the language of the soul, and my soul needed to speak to his one last time. I hope I did it right. I hope that wherever he is, he heard. And I hope he knew how much he meant to all of us, how much he still means." Weeks later, several musicians who had been at the funeral began sharing their own perspectives of that moment, each processing it in their own way, each finding different meanings in what they had witnessed. Slash wrote on Instagram, "I've seen Axl do incredible things on stages in front of 100,000 people. I've been by his side in the highest moments of his career, but I had never seen him so vulnerable, so honest, so completely human. That day reminded me why we're friends, why we do this, why music matters more than everything else. It was the most powerful moment I've witnessed in 40 years of playing rock and roll." Duff McKagan was more philosophical in his reflection. "Death forces us to confront what really matters. All the stupid fights, all the egos, all the competitions over who's bigger or more successful, all of that fades when you see someone pour out their soul like that. Axl showed us that in the end, only music and love remain. Everything else is noise." Paul Stanley went further. In an extensive interview for a specialized magazine, he said, "That day, Axl reminded us of something we sometimes forget in this business. That behind the lights, the makeup, the poses, and the deafening noise, We're just humans trying to connect with other humans. And music is our bridge. Ace knew that better than anyone. Axl knows it. And that day, that bridge was visible to everyone lucky enough to be there. Gene Simmons, typically reserved with his emotions, admitted on a podcast, "I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I've been in this business 50 years. I've seen everything. But I had never seen anything so honest, so real." Axl risked looking weak, and in that risk, he found a strength that none of us normally have. That's real rock and roll, not the pose, the truth. The song Axl played became an unofficial farewell anthem in the global rock community. Every time a musician died in the following months, fans around the world played it, sang it, shared it, with small modifications, changing the name, adding their own verses, making it personal, making it their own. Because that's what true art does. It doesn't remain static. It transforms. It adapts. It lives beyond its original creator. It serves purposes that were never planned but are perfectly necessary at the exact moment they're needed. If this story moved you, if you felt something real in your chest while listening to it, share in the comments. What song would you like to play at your own farewell? What music speaks the language of your soul when words fail? Because we all have that song, the one that says what we can't articulate, the one that heals when nothing else works, the one that connects souls across time, space, and even death itself. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that go to the heart of rock, that show the humanity behind the stage legends, that remind us that music is much more than empty entertainment. It's connection, it's healing, it's love in its purest and most powerful form. See you in the next story. And always remember, rock and roll doesn't die when musicians die. It just changes form. It just waits for the right hands to keep playing. And as long as you keep listening, feeling, and loving music with all your being, the legends will never really leave. They'll live forever in every chord you play, in every song you sing, in every moment when music saves you from darkness. Rock doesn't die, it just changes form. And Ace Frehley is still playing somewhere. You can hear him if you pay attention. In the silence between notes, in the echo of a distant guitar, in the heart of every musician who refuses to give up.